All right, welcome in to Carps Corner, and just finishing up here. Memorial Day weekend or Memorial Day week coming out of the weekend. There's a lot of sports stuff going on. We'll start getting into maybe a little bit of the NBA playoffs, NBA finals rather, and what's going on there. We got the NHL playoffs, Stanley Cup. That's always fantastic. I love hockey playoffs, but there's been a ton of news. I keep harping on college football, and maybe that's just because of what's nearest and dearest to my heart. So we got some news out of the Big 12 that we're going to get into. Pretty interesting, I guess, how people view their situation. What are the expectations? And then we got a story out of Michigan as well about their expectations and where they view themselves. I addressed, in the last episode talking about Jim Harbaugh and how aloof he was with NIL and understanding of the whole concept of how much guys were getting paid. Was it a real thing, or these all fishtails about how much guys were actually making? No, Jim, those are all real. And Ryan Day's out talking about needing to raise $13 million a year. And that's not a knock on, Ohio State. It's just that's the cost of doing business. If you're trying to compete with the elite teams, Alabama, Georgia, Clemson, Texas, Oklahoma, A&M. I mean, these schools that are raising tons of money to get players. USC, you have to be able to do that. You have to go out there and find a way to raise that money in these collectives and making sure that people in the business community within your region are giving your players opportunities to earn. And so Ryan Day talked about that. Jim Harbaugh didn't seem to understand that. But there is one thing they're doing up at Michigan that I really like. And we'll get into that. And then lastly, one of the things I want to preview is Frank Gore, guy who I played against in the NFL a couple times, recently just announced his retirement, signed a one-day contract with the San Francisco 49ers. Coincidentally enough, played for Jim Harbaugh out there. So, with that, little nice segue as well. But wanted to start off with the University of Michigan. And like I said, Jim Harbaugh seemed a little aloof on the NIL front. And when he got to Ohio State or got to Michigan, it seemed like the Ohio State rivalry, he was supposed to be the answer. 0-7 against Urban. He lost his first contest against Ryan. They canceled the second one. He gets his win. Finally, after, it seemed like nearly a decade, but finally gets his win. And then promptly tried to leave and looked like he was trying to take another job, get back to the NFL, and would have probably gone anywhere in the NFL that would have had him. But that doesn't materialize. And so how are you going to build on that? This would have been a great opportunity for Michigan to parlay, beating Ohio State, winning the Big Ten, going to the college football playoffs, and using that momentum, pushing them in the positive direction. Well, the NIL stuff doesn't seem like they've got it down. Their coach looking to leave, that didn't really seem to help. But the Ohio State-Michigan rivalry is something that on the Buckeyes side, they've taken very seriously ever since Jim Tressel returned in 2002. And with that, when you take something seriously, it's usually going to be reflected in the record if talent is equitable. And there's been times where that talent has swung wildly to Ohio State. Last year, Michigan got the win. I think the talent was a little more equitable than maybe it had been in the past. Michigan's won in 2003, 2011, and then recently, in 2022, or 2021 was able to get that victory. And so with that, you analyze what happened post-mortem for Ohio State. For Michigan, you look at what you've done right. But for the last 20 years, and even before that, Ohio State has leaned into this rivalry. And Jim Tressel with his opening press conference or his opening appearance at the Schottenstein Center, talking about how proud the fans would be of their team in 300 and some odd days up in Ann Arbor, Michigan, after the game. I got everybody riled up. And, it's a little bit of red meat for the fan base, but it got everyone fired up. It meant that Jim Tressel was going to take it seriously. Urban Meyer got here, 7-0, wanted to take it incredibly seriously. Ryan Day kind of learned from that and kind of embraced it. And even if Ryan might not be from Ohio, I know that he's probably feels as disrespected as anyone by Jim Harbaugh. And if that's his driving force, then so be it. Go ahead and use whatever motivation you can. But it's something they talk about a lot at the Woody Hayes, and they emphasize it. They have their workouts, they have the countdown clock, all this stuff that you always hear about, but those things are real. You've got to practice what you preach. And so they go through that, and each and every day, every week in the offseason, there's something they talk about. And when you beat Michigan, you get a pair of gold pants. And what are those? A little charm that you're going to have. I've got 3 pairs. My mom's got 2 of them. My wife's got 1. I don't really wear jewelry, but you get this pair of gold pants, and the history behind it goes all the way back to the 1930s when Michigan was dominating college football. And outside of the Chick Harley era at the end of the late teens, early 20s, Ohio State never had a lot of success. Win here, win there. I don't even know if they had anything back to back. But Francis Schmidt, who played at Ohio State, who came in and said, hey, they put their pants on one leg at a time, and we can beat these guys. Subsequently won 4 games. And then after that, lost 3 in a row, and they fired him. And that's how it's been. But from that, the legend of the gold pants were born. And so that's been something that's been going on with Ohio State lore for 75 years. And so Michigan, who had dominated this rivalry for a long time, and especially in the 90s, talked about Michigan State being their bigger rival. And then, kind of shirking off responsibility, and maybe it's not as big a game as it used to be. And hey, we're a basketball school. But all of a sudden in 2021, they get their victory, get real chesty, and rightfully so. They won the game. It was a dominating performance, physical fashion. And I tell people, I didn't enjoy seeing that as alum, but sometimes you got to tip your cap and say, nice job, well done. And that is the best part about these rivalry games. Well, Michigan's up in the ante now. And it may have been, 20 years too late, maybe even 50 or 60 years too late. And maybe they thought that having like the trophy game or the charm game, that stuff was beneath them, but not anymore. Jim Harbaugh is trying to up the ante, and he's trying to instill some passion and excitement around this game that had seemingly kind of lost its luster. When a rivalry is dominated by one side for so long, kind of loses it. You have to have the pendulum swing back. Well, it swung back last year, and we'll throw this up here. Take a look at it here. To the victor go the spoils. And you can see a little charm here. It's got 142 on it. I'm guessing that's for the 142nd iteration of this Michigan football team. Been playing football for a long time up there. And then on the back, you got a little O, block O, not in red, scratched out. I believe they've got the score on there. And so now, apparently they're going to have a little charm, a little necklace for beating Ohio State. Well, so we'll throw this up. So after beating Ohio State for the first time in 10 years last November, the Wolverines took page on the Buckeyes playbook. Much like the gold pants that the Ohio State players receive every year, the Buckeyes beat Michigan. Wolverine players received charms on Friday commemorating their victory over Ohio State in Ann Arbor last season. Let's throw that charm back up again. So you look at that thing and you see it and you think, you know what? I respect the fact you're taking it seriously. I really like the fact they're taking it seriously. A little bit of doubling back because I felt like Michigan fans I talked to, former players, guys who I'd played against, get in the NFL, they joke around about the charm, the little necklace, little trinkets they call it for beating, Michigan. And okay, when you're the big dog, everybody wants to beat you and everybody's going to put things together. We don't need to commemorate a victory that we should be getting anyway. Okay, I get it. It makes sense. But all of a sudden now, come 2021 victory, and then year 2022, kicking off the summer workouts. So guarantee that little ceremony with this. Got everybody up there, and they probably talked about how they're going to get the one next year. And I don't blame them, but now they're going to the charm. And outside of the score on the pants, it says like OSU, and you have the score on one leg, UM, and have the score on another. There's no symbolism for the team up north. There's nothing on. There's no Wolverine. There's no wing-tipped helmet. There's no blue or anything else or anything on there. It just has a score and it says UM, OSU, and UM. That's it. And the gold pants. I love the fact that they go full on and throw a block O on here. Jim's leaning in hard. He's leaning in hard. And yeah, maybe scratched out with like the Wolverine gold claws. This is pretty big. And so to me, I think the rivalry might be getting interesting again. And for Ohio State, should they be able to get the win, and for Ryan to be able to collect his second victory over Jim Harbaugh in Michigan, I think it'll be even sweeter. It'll be even better now that they have something, because, I mean, they have a full disclosure, for a period, especially under Coach Cooper, you're handing out 2 pairs of gold pants over like a 13-year period. You don't need a whole lot of money in the fund to buy gold pants. In the gold pants tradition, there's a gold pants club, and they'd raise money. Well, after 20 years of buying 17 gold pairs, like, they had to start doing more fundraisers to be able to raise money to fill the coffers to be able to buy those gold pants. And so we'll see how often Michigan, Jim Harbaugh, how often they're using these pendants, how often they're making them, how often they're able to beat Ohio State. I love the fact that 142 years into playing football, you start a tradition against a team that you played over 100 times. But hey, it's never too late. It's never too late to start that tradition. Put a little bow on that. I'm excited for this year. It should be a fun one. Moving on, since we talked about Michigan, guy who coached the San Francisco 49ers at Michigan now, Jim Harbaugh, coached Frank Gore there. Frank Gore amassed 16,000 yards over the course of his storied career, bouncing around, with the Niners. My goodness, I can't even think of all where he went. Most recently finished up with the Colts, Dolphins, all these. He bounced around at the end of his career, but spent the bulk, about a decade of his career, with the Niners. Very good player. 1,600 yards, third all-time leading rusher in NFL history. It's pretty impressive stuff. Naturally, you'd think third all-time leading rusher would be a Hall of Famer. And I sit there and I struggle with this with Frank Gore. Only once was he a second-team All-Pro. And so my qualifications for Hall of Fame were, for a period of like 4 to 7 years, you had to be in the conversation for being the best at your position. I look at some guys, obviously Randy Moss is in there. Guys with shorter careers. Terrell Davis. That's why I think he is a Hall of Famer. Zach Thomas, the guy who I played with, 5-time first-team All-Pro, 2-time second-team All-Pro. I think that's the stuff. And he played a long time as well. Those are the numbers I think get you in. When you're an All-Pro, first or second team, for the better part of a decade, maybe an offensive or defensive player in the year, and I think that gets you there. I started looking at guys who I played with who I would say were as good, if maybe not even better. All different runners, because running backs come in different shapes and sizes. You got Sean McCoy, Adrian Peterson, LaDainian Tomlinson. I get it. Those two guys, they'll LT Hall of Famer, AP, going to be a Hall of Famer. Ricky Williams, who I thought may have been the best. Now, if Ricky would have stayed the course, not took a hiatus, to smoke full time, and, the NFL's drug testing policies were maybe what they were right now. But Ricky Williams was phenomenal. Played with him, played against him. Dude was a beast. D'Angelo Williams, another elite running back. Played a long time for Carolina. Really, really good. You got beast mode. Marshawn Lynch, Steven Jackson, unbelievably gifted physical specimen. Elite for a number of years. Now, Frank Gore, I don't think was the most talented out of those guys. Dude was a tough, determined runner. Not the fastest in the world, but great vision. Ran with great pad level. He did a lot of things. He stayed healthy over the course of his career. And when you look at it coming out of Miami, he had multiple ACL tears. And that's the reason why Willis McGahee, they said, got to start at Miami. It was simply due to the fact of Frank Gore's injuries. And so, you know what? I give him a lot of credit for staying healthy and being a grinder. And his numbers tell you he should be in the Hall of Fame when you look at it in totality. And I don't like to use the word compiler because, man, he grinded and was able to stay healthy in the NFL for so long. But I don't know if you look at it and thought Frank Gore was ever in the top 3 or 4 running backs for an extended period of time. And that's where I struggle with his Hall of Fame candidacy. Is that bad? Frank Gore's a great player, heck of a lot better player than I was. And so I'm not sitting here trying to tell you that he shouldn't be a Hall of Famer, and I'm even in that category. But I just look at the other great running backs from his era and guys that kind of overlapped. And some of those dudes are Hall of Famers. LaDainian Tomlinson, in. Adrian Peterson, going to be in. Marshawn Lynch, Steven Jackson, like some of these other guys that were just, and I this list came to me fairly quickly. It wasn't like I put an immense effort into creating it. But in doing that, like all of these guys came to mind. I'm like, man, these dudes are probably better. And maybe they didn't have that longevity, which is a skill and it's a trait, but I think those guys are probably better. So I don't know at the end of this how we're going to ultimately judge Frank Gore. Great running back, Hall of Famer, probably due to longevity, but I don't know if he ever had the concentration, those elite years where you look at it. It was a second team All-Pro one time. But you start looking at a guy, I look at Zach Thomas, who I played with, who I idolized growing up, 5-time first team All-Pro, 2-time second team All-Pro. He's not in the Hall of Fame yet. And so when you have guys like that, and he also played 13 years. So when you have guys like that who were elite, but also played a while, I think you got to lean to them, even if they may not be third all time in a significant category. I respect Frank Gore. He had a tremendous career. He's probably going to get into the Hall of Fame, but you have to ask yourself, over the course of his career, was he ever one of the best 2 or 3 running backs in the league? Because AP voting for the All-Pro would tell you no. And that's okay. But I think if you were to pick a team while he was playing and looking to select running backs, I don't know if he would ever be your first, second, or probably third or fourth choice. But he had a great career and he played a long time. He stayed healthy as heck and he loves the game of football. And I love Frank Gore for all those things. And that's not a knock on Frank. I'm not here trying to bang on him because, man, he ripped off a touchdown run against us when I was in Detroit. I popped my gap and heck, about half of that run was on me. So I'm not going to sit here and tell you he wasn't great because he was really stinking good. And lastly, I'm going to finish with this. Big 12, beating their chest a little bit. Bob Bowlesby moving on as their commissioner. So they're going to be in the hunt this summer looking for a commissioner, trying to find this. But they were really excited about some revenue numbers that were coming. And so we'll throw this out. The Big 12 conference will distribute $426 million of revenue to its 10 schools for the 21-22 school year. Nearly 25% increased over last year. So that's year over year, and 10% higher than its peak from prior to the pandemic. So this is a banner year for the Big 12. 10% off of its peak, 25% off of last year, still coming out of COVID a little bit. 10 schools. Look, you divide that up, averaging $42 million per school. I don't know exactly how it's broken down in the Big 12. I think Texas gets a disproportionate share because that's how they've worked it. I think Oklahoma might be in that category a little as well, but they're both going to be leaving. So, but think about this. You start thinking about that. It sounds well and good. 10% year over year, or 10% off the peak, 25% gain year over year. So there, it's a record banner year, most all-time revenue by 10%. And it's $426 million. Now, the Big Ten has more schools, got 14 schools. However, they're talking about negotiating a TV rights media package deal that's going to be in excess of $1 billion, more than twice that. And so while that number might be good for the Big 12, you look at what the SEC, who, by the way, is going to be grabbing those 2 top schools, is doing. You look at what the Big Ten is negotiating right now. And you start looking at that and realizing, holy smokes, that sounds good for the Big 12. And it's going to be great and they might have 14 schools for a while. They'll drop back to 12 with the addition of BYU, Cincinnati, Central Florida, and Houston. But there is getting to be a clear delineation. They're going to have to figure this stuff out about TV rights, who's getting what. But I don't know how some of these schools will ultimately be able to compete, how some of the conferences will, because you cannot outraise $40 and $50 million budget deficits when revenue deficits when you start talking about what the SEC and Big Ten are going to get. So while the Big 12 can puff their chest, and this is the best year they've ever had, a banner year by 10%, it's still not a great season when you look at where some of the other conferences are going to be. The ACC, they're right there. Pac-12 trailing, but they've got to figure this darn thing out, and they got to figure it out in a hurry. And lastly, before I get out, I want to throw a shout out to my guy Steve, who hosted a big block party at the end of the year. For my kids and a lot of the neighborhood kids out there late, had a good time, and that was good. And one final piece, because I'd be remiss if I didn't say this. June 7th is a big day in our country's history. Operation Overlord took place, which most of us know as the Normandy Invasion, D-Day, if you will, has come to be known. 160,000 troops across the English Channel. They had 5,000 transportation boats to pour those souls onto the beaches, all being told, taking 5 beaches right there off the coast of France with Normandy. And that was when the tide began to swing dramatically, giving the Allied forces a foothold in the European theater. And that was in 1944. And in 1942, the Battle of Midway on June 6th was wrapping up. And June 6th was D-Day too. I apologize. Shouldn't have said June 7th. On June 6th, Midway was wrapping up as well. And that swung the tide in the Pacific, with the United States, the Battle of Midway, destroying 4 Japanese carriers, losing Yorktown, one of their carriers as well, but destroying 4 out of the Japanese fleet. And so in 42, you have Midway wrapping up around June 6th, June 7th. 4 carriers destroyed for the Japanese Imperial Navy, only 1 of the United States, and pushing the tide big time there. And then 2 years later in the European theater, 160 brave souls, 5,000 transport boats, and a litany of other destroyers and all kinds of things, shelling that beach, risked their lives, poured out of that thing, out of those boats to storm beaches, knowing that most of them were marching off to certain death. And they did it anyway. And they took the 5 beaches, controlling them right around Normandy and France, giving the Europeans and the Allied forces a foothold into Europe, into France, to be able to march to Berlin. So let's remember that this week as we think about this, coming off Memorial Day last week, right here. It's pretty powerful stuff. Not many people left from the D-Day invasion. And those that are deserve a big thank you. That's it for this edition of Carps Corner. Appreciate you listening. Subscribe, like, comment. Any questions you have, topics you want me to get into, please share this. I enjoy doing it, and look forward to talking to you soon. Thanks.